This is robert+bailey of the Copenhagen Voice at a so-called pre-COP15 meeting of politicians in Copenhagen. With me is Robert+bailey of Oxfam, who has a special message to the ministers about the way the developing countries regard the situation. Rob.
What's absolutely fundamental for developing countries is that the climate deal doesn't turn into another round of stop-start trade talks. We can't afford to see climate change negotiations drag on for years, because climate change is already affecting the lives of millions of poor people around the world today. So what we need to see happen in Copenhagen is for rich countries to come forward with very clear commitments to cut their own emissions and to finance low carbon growth and adaptation in developing countries.
We've just seen the Danish minister and yvo+de+boer of UNFCCC talk about what amounts to a semi-binding agreement here in Copenhagen in December, with further binding agreements next year. No one's coming with figures. They say what more figures. The US is prevaricating. Will we get a decision next year, do you think?
I think we should get a decision this year. We should get a decision in Copenhagen. It's worth bearing in mind that the US and China have been having a summit earlier this week, and President Obama and Hu Jintao have been very clear that rich countries need to come to Copenhagen with commitments on finance and commitments on emissions reduction. Jonathan Pershing, the US negotiator, earlier in the month at Barcelona, was clear that it's still possible for the US to come to Copenhagen with real commitments on numbers. I think the US administration knows that it has to come to Copenhagen. It knows it has to put numbers on the table. It knows it has to do a deal.
But does the US Senate realize that?
The US Senate has its own processes, and it has to run to that particular process. It looks like things are going to go into next year. That doesn't stop US negotiators and the US administration coming to Copenhagen and putting numbers on the table. What we mustn't do, what we can't afford to do, is get caught up in this whole debate about whether something is legally binding, politically binding, extending a timetable into next year. We have to focus on Copenhagen. We can do a deal. We just need rich countries to show the political will and put the numbers, the money on the table. It's still there to play for.
The Danish Minister connie+hedegaard said that agreement is not 100% now. It should be as soon as possible, but she does not see a time frame of 5 or 10 years. You will be pushing for an agreement now on behalf of the developing countries.
Absolutely. We are pushing for an agreement on numbers. The numbers are the cornerstones, the fundamental building blocks of a deal. Unless the numbers are on the table, whether or not something is politically binding or legally binding is neither here nor there, because it's worthless. It's an empty deal. The fundamental thing that we have to achieve in Copenhagen is getting rich countries to commit to the numbers, the actions that are required in order to avoid catastrophic climate change.
And I understand that the leader of the Maldives Islands has said he can see no reason why his country should sign what amounts to a suicide pact if the developing countries, if the US doesn't sign. Comments on that?
Well, this gets right to the heart of the matter at the moment. At the present time, vulnerable developing countries such as the Maldives, such as countries in sub-Saharan Africa, have no choice at all. There's not a deal on the table that they can sign up to. They can't. The offers on the table from rich countries to cut their own emissions and finance adaptation and mitigation in poor countries just are not sufficient. There's not a deal on the table that's worth them signing up to. So we have to see an increase in the level of ambition from all rich countries. It's not just about America coming to the table with numbers, it's about all rich countries increasing their ambition.
Robert+bailey, Oxfam, the Copenhagen Voice.